In Venezuela, the President Nicolas Maduro said that fascists and extremism sectors want to impose themselves with the aim of attacking not only Chavismo but all democratic and independent movements in the world. In Mexico, the Senate approved on Wednesday the judicial reform promoted by President Andrés Manuel López Obrador after sabotage attempts sponsored by right-wing groups. And in the United States, the presidential candidates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris participated in the first presidential debate ahead of the elections on November 5th. Hello, welcome from the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Venezuela, the President Nicolas Maduro said that fascist and extremist sectors want to impose themselves with the aim of attacking not only Chavismo but all democratic and independent movements in the world. During the plenary session of the Federal Government Council, the Venezuelan president condemned the attempts to lead the country into a civil war. On the other hand, the Venezuelan executive stated that the Spanish government has welcomed its capital fugitives from national justice and other characters involved in destabilizing and criminal acts, thus becoming a reference of neofascism in the old continent.
Jamás hemos pateado el tablero.
We have never broken the rules, nor we will accept that anyone breaks the rules, neither in Venezuela nor in Madrid. Look at the book that Ernesto Villegas gave me. Look. I have a book by an intellectual called Pablo del Hierro, professor at the Complutense University. I don't know him. He sends it to me already studied and marked. Madrid, metrópolis neofascista, vidas secretas, rutas de escape, negocios oscuros y violencia política. Translated as Madrid, metropolis neofascist, secret lives, escaped routes, shady business, and political violence. Because Madrid, since the time of Franco, was transformed into what we could say the inn of fascism in Europe and in the world. And today it has become the receptacle of how many terrorists, corrupt and fascists there are in Venezuela, who flee to Madrid. There is the vampire. We all know the vampire. If in Venezuela there is the Sayona, there is the vampire.
Allá está el vampiro. Todos conocemos al vampiro. Si en Venezuela está la Sayona, allá está el vampiro.
There is a mentally ill man who participates in all the conspiracies to put bombs, to kill, to attack. Leopoldo Lopez, a sociopath. No one recognizes it. He is hiding. The one who publicly, notoriously and communicatively, was responsible for spraying gasoline and killing our boy, there in Altamira in Chacao, Orlando Figuera.
Protegido el que pública, notoria y comunicacionalmente fue el responsable de...
There he is requested by the courts of Venezuela. Public, how many more fascists? And it seems that fascism has the political power to subdue, twist arms and keep Madrid as the neo-fascist metropolis of Europe, since the Franconist nest in Madrid.
¿Cuántos fascistas más? Y pareciera que el fascismo tiene el poder político.
That is why I say we played fair. Let's keep playing fair to Venezuela.
A Madrid como la metrópolis neofascista de Europa.
In Venezuela, human rights activist and defender Michel Madere participated in the World Congress Against Neofascism and other similar activities held in La Carlota, where representatives from more than 95 countries share common ground on an issue that puts the whole world at risk.
I knew I had a father, but I never saw him. And I learned in school, when I was very little, I was 3 years old, 3.5 years old, and a little girl told me that my father had died in a crematorium oven. And I didn't know what a crematorium oven was. And when I got home, I asked my mother what crematorium oven meant. And I didn't get an answer, so I grew up with the idea that I had a father who had died in a crematorium oven. And I stayed for years with that idea. I would watch my mother prepare packages to send to someone. And I assumed she was sending packages to my father. And packages that, later on, I know never arrived. I had to learn what fascism was, precisely in order to learn to continue my life. to grow up in this period of the Second World War with a lot of what was not said, a lot of silence.
In our news, in Colombia, at least 10 people were injured, one of them seriously, after a grenade exploded outside a police station in Bogota. Local authorities are investigating the incident, which raised community concerns about security in the capital. The explosion occurred at a time of increasing violence in the country, with armed groups stepping up their attacks. Police have tightened security in the area and are on high alert. This attack adds to a series of recent incidents that have affected security forces in Colombia, prompting authorities to redouble efforts to combat crime and restore public confidence. Investigations continue to determine the perpetrators of this violent act. And in Mexico, the judicial reform was approved in general in the Senate after a long session in which Morena achieved a qualified majority. The final vote was 86 votes in favor and 41 against, and included a violent reaction from the PAN opposition, which tried at various times to stop the discussion. Its promoters described the reform as historical, claiming it aims to guarantee that every person has real access to justice through a profound change in the organization and integration of the various bodies that make up the federal judicial power and the local judicial powers. Senator Gerardo Fernández Noroña announced the approval as the long session came to an end.
According to the vote count, a total of 127 votes were cast, of which 86 were in favor, 41 against, and 0 abstentions, thus meeting the qualified majority required for the approval of the decree.
There is a qualified majority, therefore it is approved in general and in everything not reserved of the draft decree amending, adding, and revoking various provisions of the political constitution of the 11 Mexican states in matters of reform of the judiciary.
The Mexican National Water Commission reported that Tropical Storm Francine became a Category 1 hurricane after passing through the Gulf of Mexico. Mexican authorities say it is important for the population and maritime navigation to heed the warnings of the Meteorological Service, although the weather event is moving away from the territory. The National Hurricane Center reported that the now Category 1 hurricane is heading towards Louisiana with winds of up to 120 km per hour. Francine is expected to continue strengthening until it makes landfall this Wednesday. The projected path includes areas of New Orleans, Mississippi, and Alabama. The Vietnamese Department of Dike Management and Disaster Prevention and Control reported at least 143 deaths and 58 others are missing following the passage of Typhoon Yagi. The most hit areas are Dien Bai, Cao Ban, and Lao Cai localities, while the Bao Yen districts severe landslide had been recorded. The Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam in Lao Cai and other senior government authorities are directly in charge of leading the search and rescue efforts. Meanwhile, the Central Committee of the Vietnam Fatherland Front launched a campaign to support the victims of Typhoon Yagi. Let's now take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at teleSUR English, where you'll find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. In the United States, the first and possibly only debate between the presidential candidates, Republican Donald Trump and Democrat Kamala Harris, took place on Tuesday, as thousands of citizens took to the streets of Philadelphia, the city that hosted the face-to-face debate.
The first presidential debate between the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and the former president and Republican candidate Donald Trump took place this Tuesday, September 10. It lasted 90 minutes and focused on issues such as migration and abortion. Trump said that Biden let dangerous people into the country and said that migrants come from asylums and prisons, and that they eat cats and dogs in border cities. Democrat candidate Harris introduced a bill and recalled that she has added 1,500 border agents, which has allowed her to stop the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States. Vice President Kamala Harris also said that Donald Trump left them the worst unemployment rate since the Great Depression, the worst epidemic in public health in a century, and the worst attack on democracy since the Civil War, and said that she and Biden have been tasked with cleaning up Trump's mess. She also recalled that Trump has been processed for national security and economic crimes. Regarding abortion, Kamala Harris said that more than 20 states had bans on abortion imposed by Donald Trump, with no exceptions for rape or incest. She said that Donald Trump should not tell a woman what to do with her body. She also mocked Trump, a very tense moment in the debate, because she said that people get bored and leave his campaigns because he always says the same thing. About the events in the Capitol on January 6th, she said that Donald Trump incited a mob to storm the Capitol, and that she, as a senator and vice president, saw it all because she was there. Something that made the former president very angry was the fact that Kamala claimed that many world leaders who have met with her openly mock Trump. Kamala alleged that Trump can be manipulated with flattery, and some leaders have done so. The former U.S. president says that the U.S. spends millions of dollars in Ukraine. He said that $250 billion or more, and said that it will be in the U.S. interest to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. On the other hand, Kamala said that Donald Trump is weak and wrong, and that he wants to be a dictator. On the other hand, Trump said that Kamala is a Marxist. In short, they have very different and even antagonistic positions expressed in 90 minutes. It is likely that there will be another debate between the candidates, but nothing certain yet.
Nada está seguro. Aiza García con la información del debate presidencial estadounidense.
Moving on to other news, the Israeli forces keep up the siege against the Palestinian civilian population. In the past couple of hours, they have slaughtered over 27 Gazans. While the U.S. presidential nominees ratified their support for Israel's right to defense, as the U.S. is the main partner in the genocidal operation of the Zionist regime against Palestine, on Wednesday the Israeli troops have been dropping bombs on a residential building in Han Yunis, claiming 13 lives. Meanwhile, the army killed a fisherman nearby Al-Mawasi, and minutes later the Israeli forces attacked the Jabalia refugee camp, leaving 9 deaths, including 3 children and 2 women. The Israeli army further mounted an incursion into an apartment building in Nuseirat, Gaza's downtown, bringing about 4 fatal victims and 11 injured. In this context, United Nations Secretary General spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said that the UN condemns the attack perpetrated by the Israeli army in Han Yunis refugee camp in Gaza. Dujarric assured that the Secretary General considers unacceptable the use of weapons in populated areas. The spokesman reiterated that there is currently no safe place in Gaza and appealed on behalf of the agency for an immediate ceasefire. According to health authorities, occupation forces have killed nearly 41,000 Palestinians since last October. We now have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to visit our YouTube channel at teleSUR English. There you'll be able to rewatch our interviews, top stories, special broadcastings, and more. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell to stay up to date on the world's most recent events. Final short break, and go away. Welcome back. The alleged sonic attacks against U.S. diplomats and spies in Cuba, also known as Havana syndrome, made headlines around the world. However, many questions remain unanswered. What exactly was intended? What is behind the unexplained illness? What were the consequences of the whole story? In Havana, experts on the subject talked to teleSUR Fabiola Lopez with the details.
A little more than a week ago, several media revealed that the CIA used coercion against people who were part of the investigation of the so-called Havana syndrome. The cancellation of the investigations of the alleged sonic attacks made the news, but not a word to mention the damage caused by the mysterious disease to the Cuban people which in the opinion of this expert has had to pay a great cost.
In terms of political dialogue, but also on the family and personal level. Since the closing of the diplomatic headquarters in Havana and forcing the ordinary Cuban citizen to go to a third country in order to obtain a visa and cutting off the flow of academic and scientific exchanges, has rendered the diplomatic headquarters in Havana inoperative. Even today, there is still no compensation, no restitution to the Cuban people for what they have had from the moral point of view in intangible matters, and from the practical point of view, it would be impossible to quantify the losses caused by all this eagerness to keep Cuba on the list of terrorist countries. The blockade remains. The sanctions are used, the punitive instruments, the unilateral coercive measures that all have the purpose of breaking the revolution. The sanctions are used, the unilateral coercive measures that all have the purpose of breaking the revolution.
An interesting view on the subject has the authorized voice of journalist Raul Antonio Capote, who worked for the CIA as an infiltrated of the Cuban state security. He associates the coercion of the United States intelligence services to the participants in the research on the so-called Havana syndrome with MKUltra, the dantesque experiment of the CIA to control the human mind.
Everyone kept repeating that this was the first time that they had ever failed, that they had failed in their ethics. Which is totally untrue if we could give hundreds of examples of how many times in the history of the U.S. Special Services situations like this have occurred. And one example is MKUltra is a CIA project that began in 1953, in which experiments were made with people of various types, prisoners, students, psychiatric patients, even CIA personnel were subjected to these experiments because they were obsessed with mind control. They said that the next war was going to be fought in the realm of the mind and that whoever controlled the mind would be able to win this new war scenario.
Specialists from the United States, Canada, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, China, Russia, and Cuba agree that the coined term, Havana syndrome, is a media fabrication and the accusations do not stand up to serious scientific analysis, yet the subject continues to be discussed. The deputy director of the United States Directorate of the Cuban Foreign Ministry explains why on the island's local television station.
In an election year, they are trying to keep this issue alive by obtaining promises of compensation from the supposed victims of the non-existent attacks, and with the purpose of taking advantage of the existence of a law invented by Senator Marco Rubio to compensate the victims and keep the issue alive, and also to justify new measures against Cuba in a future government if this or any other candidate wins, so that the sanctions and the coercive measures against our country are not lifted. That is what is happening.
What is still pending, warns this diplomat, is an apology to the people of Cuba, for which it is necessary, she says, to continue demanding the lifting of the whole spiral of unilateral coercive measures and maximum pressure that, with the initial excuse that Cuba had assaulted United States diplomats, were taken against the Cuban and American people.
Fabiola López, teleSUR.
And the first edition of Mira Art Fair comes to Paris from September 18th to the 22nd at the Maison de l'Amérique Latine. The Mira Art Fair represents a significant advance in the dissemination of contemporary Latin American art, presenting an outstanding selection of emerging and established artists from the region. The fair showcases diverse art forms, including paintings, sculptures, video art, and installations reflecting the complexity and diversity of Latin American identity. In a global environment that demands more visibility for the region's voices, this event establishes itself as a crucial point for cultural dialogue, maintaining the connection between creators and an international audience interested in new narratives and aesthetics. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. So join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thanks for watching.